really such a genuine pleasure to be back here with all of you again here today. We tiptoed into this topic briefly last time, and I'm really looking forward to opening it up and getting stuck into it with you all here today. So the first place I thought that would be useful for us to start is to think of belonging and where it sits in terms of the needs that we have as human beings. And many of you will most likely be familiar with Maslow's theory around the hierarchy of human needs. And so there's a diagram here for those of you that maybe aren't familiar, but also just to recap for those of you that have come across this before. Although it's thought that Maslow himself didn't actually create a diagram of a pyramid, many of those that have come after Maslow, including educators and management theorists, created diagrams that took a shape or a format of a pyramid. And it can be quite useful just to have in our mind as a concept, really, to bring the theory to life. And if we think on a pyramid or sort of pillars of support that we need to have in place for us to function well, to be happy, to be healthy, to be able to go about our day-to-day lives and feel like we actually have choice, that we have mobility, that we have the opportunity to thrive, not just survive in our life, it can be really useful. Because if those sort of fundamental aspects of a pyramid aren't there, then we can't sort of reach the top. We can't get to the place of feeling like we're flourishing in our life. And we really need connection, and we need to feel accepted as primary needs for us to feel like we're actually belonging, that we can switch off in terms of the hypervigilance that we would have about keeping ourselves safe. The need to belong is thought to be sort of primarily hardwired into us, really from fear that if we get ejected or othered to such a significant extent that we're booted out of our community, our tribe, then essentially we would die, because people need people. We can't really survive completely solo on our own. So when it comes to burnout, and when it comes to this series and where this aspect sits in relation to the series, when we think about performance and we think about productivity, often we've conditioned ourselves as humans to really focus on those things, but forgetting the foundations that we need in order to be able to reach them. So quite often we'll skip or attempt to skip, often subconsciously, not intentionally. We'll skip out aspects of the rungs on the ladder or the foundations on the pyramid in an attempt to get to the top. And really, it doesn't work out when we miss things out. And belonging is something that really we wanted to bring into focus as part of this series, because it is getting missed out. Not enough attention is being devoted to it. And it's a very significant protective factor in prevention of burnout. So we talked last time about people feeling that if they're heard, if they feel like they're valued and they feel like they're supported in the work that they do, but also in other relationships in their life, then they're much less likely to burn out, because those things foster our health and well-being. We feel more whole, and our nervous system's able to feel safe, so we're not stuck in any of the stress responses that we talked about in session 2, the fight, flight, freeze or fawn. If, however, we don't get this sense of belonging met, then stress can really lead to chronic fatigue and chronic stress, which means stress that's not being able to be managed. It's ongoing over a long period of time, which you may also remember if you've been in earlier sessions, that is ultimately what results in burnout. So what happens when we do burn out then, of course, is we become absolutely exhausted in all levels of our being. Some people more so mentally or emotionally, others physically. It just depends on the individual. Sometimes we become exhausted across all dimensions of our body. And then what can happen is disengagement will rise, and that can happen really sharply. And that's something, as we've talked about, that we as individuals, if we are struggling, then there will be a knock-on effect and impact on those around us. And most likely, if one person is struggling, then more people in the system are already struggling. So we can see burnout as a signal that there's stress in the system as a whole. So collectively, if there isn't a sense of belonging, then we need to do something reparative about that. So when we have these unmet needs and we're then therefore on sort of high alert, and our nervous system isn't able to rest and digest and repair itself, these fundamental aspects of our needs are then missing. And the psychological needs we talked about, I introduced a model for you called SHED, which was this concept that we need sleep, we need rest, we need hydration, we need nourishment, which is the D of the SHED. And we need the ability to move around, we need time in nature. We've sort of woven all of these things through so far. I just want to emphasize them really because it's not rocket science. We know this stuff. It's really inbuilt intuitively in us. We all know whenever things are out of balance what it is we need in order to bring it back. It's just that we tend to override that internal guidance, that internal wisdom. And so quite often when people are in really high pressure roles or high pressure situations, these physiological basic needs get missed out, they get skipped. They're the things we think we can afford not to bother to do, but they soon start to catch up on us. And we can really find ourselves then in a very difficult place where we're barely functioning and it's not sustainable. In terms of safety needs, those things can come in various different shapes and forms. So we've mentioned about feeling heard, seen, and valued. That's our psychological safety. There is also things like the safety of our job or the security of our home, our family, our possessions. Things like expectations that are placed on us can affect our safety. So we've talked before about the excessive workload, the unrealistic demands that are on pathologists in particular, and the boundaries that are being blurred through extensive overworking. So all of those things start to threaten safety. So even when there's a culture of psychological safety in general, of feeling heard, seen and trusted, which was evident in some of the stats that I shared last time from the workforce study that had been conducted, there's then this sort of push and pull between people feeling on a departmental level, maybe not organisational, but departmentally, that they have a voice, but then the workload and the boundaries being blurred contradict the safety that they feel. So the system still feels like it can't really fully rest, that it isn't really safe. And then there's a fear of being able to speak up because of that safety that's being compromised. There's equally within that setting no space for recovery and repair, which, as we've highlighted before, is essential for burnout prevention and, of course, on the other side of burnout, for recovery too. So the key when it comes to sustainable well-being, we spoke about how it's not just about the individual that goes off work because of burnout or that we're concerned about, we want to plug in support for. It's about collective restoration and how do we find a way to bring that in for everybody. And then that sitting alongside operational change. So things need to be addressed in the system. It does mean that sometimes we need to come together and be able to speak up, manage up the way. Equally, we want to hopefully get to a stage where leaders are not just being aware, but having an understanding of burnout, recognizing it for what it is, seeing it in the system and making changes from the top down too, because it's still very much a hierarchical system that the NHS, which the majority of you are employed by, are working for. So this is something that needs to come together. It can't be done one thing without the other. They both need to happen. And restoration is key for that change to be catalysed. We can't often find our voice and the energy to convey what it is that we feel and we want to say if we're running on exhaust fumes. So it's important that we find a way to restore, to then bring about the change that needs to happen. So moving up that pyramid now, we've looked at the psychological aspects of the physiological aspects, we've looked at safety, and so now thinking about love and belonging, and these two went together in terms of Maslow's concept of them. So we're going to look at it through the lens of connection, support, trust and inclusion in teams, because when our systems are overstretched, often that connection time just isn't there. We don't have the usual moments of interaction, the time together, the relationship forming and the bonds of affection that would normally develop whenever we've got a bit of spaciousness around us. So when everybody is chasing their tail overworked, overtired, depleted, they don't have the energy to give to others, so they stop actually being able to extend care and extend emotional connection and empathy. But equally, they'll find it difficult to have the time even to be able to do that, even if they had the energy for it or wanted to. And what happens when that's going on is our social ties start to erode. And many of us since the pandemic have found ourselves working more in silos, more remotely, which has had massive positive impacts for those that flexible working has been something that was much needed. But it's almost like this, the balance has tipped, the scales have tipped. And if we end up doing too much of any good thing, it starts to have a detrimental effect. So we're all trying to find a way back to balance again. And for many pathologists, it's about finding a way to still have social interaction, even though a lot of work can be and needs to be maybe carried out with concentration and focus on our own. We also need to be able to come alongside others, speak about the things we've been doing, reflect on our practice, look at the better ways forward. And when that's not happening to the extent that is healthy and beneficial, then belonging is impacted as a result of that. So I've mentioned that it's something that protects us from burnout. It's something that can be particularly difficult for people to find if they've come from other countries to work in the UK and feel a pressure to assimilate rather than feeling that they actually are being included and that they belong. And this is something I want to delve in a little bit deeper with all of you, because it's something that, again, we've highlighted in previous talks in relation to the profession and how we've got these gaps that have been filled as a temporary measure in the past, but that has become something that is ongoing, it's longer term, and it's not something that's necessarily been given a lot of thought and consideration. And therefore, many times people who come and join the roles and in the profession to fill these gaps aren't feeling really like that they're being welcomed in and that they do belong. So when somebody's identity, whenever their values, when those things aren't being reflected back, when they're not being seen, when they're not being valued, when they're not being heard, then a sense of distancing can follow. And we talked about cynicism as part of burnout and how it's something that's less spoken about. It's something that we'll typically try and mask because we know it's not socially, culturally acceptable. But it can then be there in the background and start to erode the potential for building relationships in someone if they are feeling rejected, if they're feeling othered. Something that I've spoken about before as well is this concept of regulation, how our nervous systems look and seek out other nervous systems that are regulated and grounded and whole so that we can co-regulate ourselves. And we will do that instinctively as humans with other humans. But if we can't, like a tuning fork, if we can't find somebody in close proximity to us, either through a screen or in person, that feels like they are welcoming, that they are open, that they are including us, that they do see us, that they've got space for us, that they're emotionally attuning to us, that they empathize, that they care, that they're interested, that they're curious, supportive, then what happens is we struggle to find that place in ourselves and we struggle to emanate that to other people. I mentioned about the sort of closest next best thing to a regulating human being a regulated animal or regulated environment. So being out in nature, being with a tree, for example, which is the reason for it being on the slide, being next to a body of water, a mountain, anywhere that we feel that sense of our nervous system settling can compensate. When we don't have co-regulation, either from people, from animals, or from nature, so if you think about the workplace environments that you spend so much of your time in, and how much nature is in there, how many regulated humans are there in there, how many animals are in there, and if the answer is not very much, then that's something that's going to be causing a stress in the system. Whereas when it's present, it buffers stress for us. So when it's not there, we carry a lot of weight, and When we're carrying weight, typically we will then be at risk of either withdrawing and or collapsing emotionally, mentally, physically. We went through all of the different domains of burnout and how it shows up. And when we've got a culture where we're overriding those signs and symptoms, very much one of the British sort of phrases that has been around since wartime is to keep calm and carry on. A lot of the time, that means even though we're panicking, even though there's something that feels unsurmountable because there's so much in front of us, it means not worrying about that, overriding it as if it doesn't exist, and then giving this impression that you're calm and you're going to carry on. But this, you're going to be fine, just cope, just do it, get on with it, stop complaining. It starts to undermine the psychological infrastructure that builds belonging. So we really start to feel it, even if we don't necessarily explicitly recognize it and state it and share it and name it. Our body knows it's there, and it signals to us that we are unsafe, which means that we have then our stress response firing for us. Whereas when our nervous system feels okay, all is well around me, then we're able to be present, we're able to connect, we're able to better contribute. So this is all really, really important, and belonging is something we really need. Belonging is something, and I realize I keep touching my heart even as I'm talking, it's something that happens in our body. It's a somatic response. It's a felt sense. As I'm speaking about belonging, as I'm speaking about connection and regulation, some of you might be having images in your mind's eye of nature, for example, or you might have a memory in your body of being around somebody or being somewhere or with something that calms you, that regulates you. Some of you might simply have a knowing about it or a kind of cognitive awareness of it, but there will be a reference point somewhere in your body that through your senses, you're able to recall what that means. Some of you may have a scent associated with what it means to belong. Some of you, it might be that there's a sound associated with that, the rhythm of a heartbeat, for example, perhaps. So just contemplating that. What does belonging mean for you? How does it feel for you? Because when it's not there, it kind of creeps up on us, a bit like the quicksand that I described that is evident of burnout. When it creeps up on us, that sort of feeling like little by little we're being pulled under by something. So being in an environment or a situation where we don't feel that belonging is there can start to very slowly smother us. When we don't feel seen, we don't feel accepted, we don't feel safe or valued, we don't feel supported. On the flip side, of course, when it is there, it's so good for our system. It's so good for us, and it's so good collectively for everyone around us. So belonging can happen in response to a person, multiple people, a place, or a sense of something. And when we're doing work that feels meaningful, we can have a sense of belonging through being part of a project or a movement or something that we're working towards. So again, if our work tips out of balance, the sense of belonging that we maybe once had when we entered into that work that fulfilled us, fed us, gave to us, calmed us and soothed us, expanded us, gave us hope and excitement, that can start to dissipate. And then we end up finding ourselves in a place where we don't feel like ourselves anymore. So a few points for reflection. Again, if you've been on one of these sessions before, it's an opportunity for you to reflect in whatever way feels good for you. That might be doodling, it might be jotting down notes, it might be simply sitting, closing your eyes, reflecting internally as to how your body's feeling. It might be about glancing out of the window, being with one of your pets, staring at a picture or a plant, and allow yourself to take this time for you to go a little bit deeper with what all of this means for you. So I started touching on the fact that we have this set up at the moment where we've relied on international recruitment for a very long time in the UK in order to fill chronic shortages in healthcare, and that's as a profession as a whole, not just pathologists. And because of that, there's been a sense of this is a temporary measure. It's always been something we've sort of historically seen as somebody's coming to help because we can't do it ourselves. And yet what has really happened is it's become something that's longer term. And because it's happening in many professions, not just our own, the sense of belonging has actually become quite under pressure. And there have been some really concerning political narratives lately, and I won't go into them because I'm kind of try and steer clear of talk around different aspects of politics. But I do want to just largely highlight that there have been things in the last 12 months that I'm sure haven't gone unnoticed by any of you that are here today, that has given rise to institutional racism and things that have been sat under the surface and have been almost, it feels like, reignited or refueled, that were perhaps sitting there all along and either been glazed over and not given due consideration, or they've somehow been like reignited again. But there's been a lot of people in the UK of all different backgrounds, whether they've been born and brought up in this country or whether they've come here at a different stage of their life, or whether they've been born and left and come back again, you know, whole mix, where it's been uncomfortable with what's been going on in recent months. And I think a lot of people feeling concern about what that means. And for pathologists and other NHS staff who are from minoritised or international backgrounds, this stirring up has compounded some of what's been sitting there in terms of the systems that are overstretched and under-resourced. And when we experience collectively a rhetoric that is undermining inclusion, then even when we have a supported department, as for example, the studies have reflected, the counterbalancing of that uprise in aspects of racism can really be at odds with the being seen, the being valued, the being heard. And there can be a wider impact then on this sense of identity and safety. So I wanted to speak a little bit more to what all of that means and what sits behind it, and what, by speaking to this today and contemplating it together, what we might each be able to do about it in our own way. That again, like that ripple impact that talking about things and having conversations has, start to shift things in a positive sense for the better, not fueling it, of course. So there aren't the same level of stats specific to pathology in relation to this as there are in healthcare as a whole. So I'm drawing on some studies that have been conducted, and they aren't, they're as recent as I was able to find, but they aren't kind of in tandem with what's been happening in the last 12 months. So this has sat behind the narratives and what we've been seeing more recently. But nonetheless, I think it's useful to share. So in terms of doctors in the healthcare profession, nearly 50% of doctors that joined the register in 2023 were trained internationally. And when they arrived into their roles, just as we've experienced through looking at the landscape that you are all working in, they've arrived into roles where the departments they've been placed in are already under pressure. They've come in because of the system being under pressure. So they've had to arrive, and it's been expected of them to hit the ground running. What we know is if there is less time and space for people to give attention to people, for that relational part, then it can be really transactional. It's like this person's arrived and here's what you need to do and get on with it. And there's no feeling of wraparound care, of consideration, of individual attention, and of being really valued. Now, as I've mentioned, this a scenario has been something that's really become a foundation of the NHS, and there isn't a solution that's being presented that means that that's going to be changing anytime soon. So, yeah, I believe that we're really genuinely extremely fortunate to have continuous flow of people willing to come here and do the jobs they do, especially given that they don't have adequate support for the transition into the work that they're going to do. And it's compounded by the fact that there is this underlying systemic racism in place, which means that all too often, not just is somebody coming in and they're being kind of expected to get on with it, but they often will also be met with hostility, with discrimination. And that's something really concerning that's come out from studies that have been conducted more broadly across the medical profession as a whole. So, in terms of systemic racism, there was a study conducted in 2021. So, this is 4 years ago now. And it really found racism to be widespread. And so, this was before any of the things that have occurred in the last 12 months were part of the picture. So 76% of respondents to the survey that was carried out by the British Medical Association at that time said that they experienced racism in their workplace. Now, those experiences were a combination of things. It might be that there were discriminatory comments that were being made. It might be about opportunities that they were feeling that they were overlooked, not considered for. It might have been about people scrutinising their work, being micromanaged, or bullying, which isn't just from the people that, so in the role of those that would be facing patients, not just being bullied by patients, but being bullied by colleagues, which is the bit that stood out to me as the most concerning in context to us all being here today and thinking about your profession. And the microaggressions that occur from things like somebody not bothering to learn your name or to pronounce it correctly, or even worse, making fun of somebody's name, or intentionally calling somebody by another name, and then generally feeling excluded socially from things. And almost the same percentage of respondents that had experienced racism as a combination of those factors didn't report any of that experience. And the main reason that's been given was due to fear of lack of any confidence that something would happen as a result of it. So this feeling like, well, that's just part and parcel of this experience and I have to put up with it and get on with it, that nothing's going to be done if I speak up about this. So further studies that have drilled down into this concept of systemic racism and 30% of the NHS workforce being of Black, Asian or ethnic descent and sitting in a minority group, found that 89% of NHS hospital trusts reported a higher proportion of Black and minority ethnic staff compared to white staff experiencing harassment, bullying and abuse. So, and this is specifically from staff. So this isn't people outside who are receiving services from the NHS. This is within the NHS, within the staff of the NHS. So it's higher whenever individuals are of Black or minority ethnic heritage. And please do forgive me if at any stage I don't use the most current terms, because it's something I'm endeavouring to speak to, because I think it's only through speaking to it that we change things. But the language around things is constantly changing, as it does with any other topic that we're attempting to open up and do something about, so that we bring in more equality. So by no means meaning to offend anybody with relaying of any of this. So if I stumble on anything, please do forgive me for that. There is, in the research that I did on a positive sense, November of this year, so just last month, a new programme has been announced that is specifically aimed at closing the ethnicity gap in terms of bullying, harassment and abuse claims. So there are things being done in a positive sense. And yet, as we all know with many other things, quite often projects are limited. And I'm not suggesting that it is being done in this way, but we need to bring more to it. It's rarely enough when one thing is done. So it's about, I guess, I'm wanting to help stimulate some thinking around how more can be done and what part you might be able to play in that, in voicing things, in opening things up, in speaking to them. So I very loosely use this term microaggression in relation to misnaming and not giving enough even contemplation of the significance of somebody's name. And I'll speak a bit to why that's important. There are other ways that microaggressions can occur, and what happens whenever there's this cumulative build-up of microaggressions. So when racism is there, even when it seems on the surface like it's a little bit here, the thing that's said there casually or that happens over there, it's like a drip, drip, drip effect, of when our bath floods. It doesn't often flood because we've left the tap on full. It's because there's been a drip, 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 and eventually it overflows. So what happens in relation to belonging is with racism, there's a hugely negative impact on well-being and an undermining of belonging. And so there's obviously a direct correlation there then to stress. As I've mentioned earlier, without belonging, our stress system kicks in because we don't feel safe. And corresponding to that are associated co-occurring conditions like depression, anxiety, sleep issues, low self-esteem. And really worryingly, the very reason that some people will have come over to the UK, and of course, it's not just about the people that come to the UK that are internationally trained who are experiencing racism. People who are British and born here and have trained here will also be experiencing this too. But many people who have come from somewhere outside of the UK to work in the UK to support the system in the UK will leave because of racial discrimination, as well as people leaving their jobs generally who live in the UK and have lived in the UK, either for all of their life or for other reasons beyond the profession that they are doing, will leave the profession because of racial discrimination. So along with that, people have reported feelings of being humiliated, marginalised, not being taken seriously. So in order to compensate for that, the way to restore belonging is through care. Just as things cumulatively build up, these sort of microaggressions that can lead to either the belonging never forming in the first place or the disruption of that. Similarly with burnout, it's lots of things built up over time. So too do we restore it by micro care, by putting things back to help nurture, to nourish. So when we think about burnout as a whole, the way to prevent and recover from burnout is about lots of little things, the cumulative effect of getting better rest, eating better, moving more, saying no to things, honouring boundaries. Similarly, the more that care that comes in, the more that we counterbalance racism and do the things that we can do that make the difference, the more we restore and build and foster belonging. So some of those things could include, for example, taking the care and showing interest genuinely in the person, the human that's there in front of you. Valuing all voices, not just inviting some people to the discussions that are being had, the decisions that are being made. Building in moments that really honour people and show them that they're being seen and heard and valued. And whenever somebody is essentially being onboarded for the first time, considering underneath everything that is done that you want to communicate that we welcome you here, you matter here, we're glad to have you here. So a little bit earlier I mentioned about this concept of what's the intention and what's the impact. So it came up in the chat, for example, around I hear you being said. Now, the intention of saying I hear you would be to show the person I'm listening, I'm taking it in, I'm wanting you to know that I'm present to what you're saying. The impact of that might be something different that it's experienced for certain people with that. And so what we often want to look at is our intention having the same impact as what we want it to have? Or is there actually a difference between what we're intending and how it's landing, how it's being received? So thinking behind all of our actions, all of our words, all of our gestures, all of the things we put together, what is it we're intending with this? And how is it actually being received? How is it coming across? And the only way we can really find that out is by asking, is by being brave enough to get it wrong, is by openly asking for feedback on things. And for people to be able to ask for feedback, receive feedback, but also for people to feel they can genuinely give feedback, there needs to be trust, there needs to be rapport. So it's a tricky one. It's a bit of a catch-22. The more we do to build trust, to build rapport, to say we matter, the more we can then ask for the feedback, the more we can work out where is our intention and where is our impact, where's the difference, what can we do about that, how can we make it better? And that's how we then overcome othering. I felt it would be useful to also just stimulate some thinking really about the terminology that sits in our casual conversations day to day that's really become quite outdated. And this exists in so many different aspects of our life. If I think about a lot of the medicalized language in relation to neurodiversity, for example, many aspects of terms give an indication that somebody is less than or less capable or less able, and we're starting to challenge that and rework that, but nonetheless we have a lot of it still sitting in our day-to-day. Things haven't yet been fully worked through and replaced, and similarly we're doing that in relation to terminology that really reflects white privilege and old outdated power dynamics, or at least power dynamics that maybe are still there, but we need to do something about shifting them because otherwise things are not equal. And so one of the things that has really stood out to me over recent years, and I've spent quite a considerable part of my life living and working in different countries. And I lived in Japan, for example, for 3 years. I lived in the UAE for a year. I've lived in Germany for 2 years, Belgium for a year. I've lived in Spain for 2 years. I've lived in different places and experienced what it means to be someone in a country that isn't where I was born, living and working and integrating into life. Now, when a white British person goes and works in another country, we refer to ourselves as expats. We wouldn't usually, and this is terminology that needs to be, as I say, highlighted and thought about and explored and challenged, and wouldn't usually refer to ourselves as a migrant or a foreign worker. And yet many professionals who come to the UK, who are medically trained, internationally professionals doing the same work as somebody going somewhere else and being referred to as an expat, would be referred to as a migrant or a foreign worker. So the term expat is really quite loaded, and it reinforces difference, it reinforces othering. It suggests that there's an us and there's something else. So these sorts of phrases that get thrown around, we're not there yet with deciding actually we're going to stop using this, or what might we say that feels better than that. And so finding language and challenging phrasing rather than simply continuing to use terms just because, well, that's what everybody says, or that's what I've heard over here or I've seen over there. Some probing of the hierarchy, the things that are in place that mean that when somebody does come to work in the UK, there's a barrier to them feeling at home. And there are many things that we can do to help people feel at home. And I don't mean even as broadly as, you know, the house that they're living in, the things, the physical things that would be in their home, but actually feeling at home in themselves, feeling safe in themselves, feeling seen, heard, included, feeling like they matter, feeling like the decision they've made to come from their home country and leave everybody, everything, everyone that was their, you know, places of belonging, that was their network, that was their space for being seen and heard and valued, to come here has been worth it. And so I referenced very casually earlier, or briefly rather, that names matter. And the reason I felt to spend a little bit of time on this is because it's something that studies show occurs so often and factors into this sense of microaggression, of racism that's sitting under the surface that so many people would otherwise glaze over or not think anything about. So our names matter to us, and the science about our names is really significant in terms of how it impacts on our nervous system when we hear our name. They have meaning. They have been used most, you know, often since the day we were born. They've been said to us with care, with a sense of love and belonging from the people that matter the most to us, more often than not. So they are a key to our internal system, that we're safe when we hear our name, that we're being included. So on the flip side, if our name is ignored, so someone doesn't even bother to ask your name, listen to your name when you say it, repeat it back to you, use it properly, you know, anglicizing it, so giving you a different version of your name because the name that you've shared was too difficult for them to take in and hear, and yet, you know, it probably just needed a few times, or it being written down so they could see it and take it in, you know, but they haven't taken the time to do that. So, they just give you another name that sounds like something more familiar to them, and we'll use that instead. So being renamed, essentially, because somebody couldn't be bothered to learn your name properly, or keeping the name that you've given but mispronouncing it over and over and over. These things have really been linked significantly to lack of respect, lack of equality, lack of inclusivity. And it threatens our sense of identity. It threatens our sense of status within ourselves. It really negatively impacts on nervous system regulation. The research shows that when a name that is other than our name is created and consent is sought about the use of it, and it's shared with warmth and care, affection, then a nickname can be restorative for us in the same way that our own actual name is. But the key there is consent. So that can deepen belonging. But if we simply give somebody another name without seeking consent, and insist on it, or we'll just call you Gina because Gourmet is too difficult to pronounce, for example, then that can increase isolation and confusion and loss of identity. And especially if there's mocking involved with it as well. So I was just thinking of an example of a time when my husband went to buy a car, and he went into the sales room, and whenever he went to say his name, and he has been given a British name because of being dual heritage, but when he went to say his name, the assistant in the car sales room said, "Oh, I was expecting you to have one of those wibbly wobbly names." Really flippantly, just coming out with a comment like that can do so much harm to somebody's sense of belonging, of identity, of value, of worth. So just noticing where things have been casually thrown around like that in your experience, either the experience you've had of your own name or the experience that you've had of how people in your team have responded to others and other people's names, or you yourself, perhaps not realizing the intention and the impact, not appreciating the impact that what you have said or done in the past may have had on somebody. The other thing I wanted to speak to is something that comes up quite a lot in British culture in terms of criticism for those that have moved here from other countries, um, and the impression of somebody not making the effort to integrate. And I think when somebody has never had the experience of going and living in another country, they don't really appreciate what's involved in moving abroad. When you have to adapt to everything, when there's a different climate, a different language, different cultural cues, a different way of working, different working ethics, different working expectations, and of course, different senses of humour. And really what happens when somebody transitions from one country to another is they are on a daily basis needing to reacclimatize in themselves with every part of themselves in relation to every part of life. It's extremely exhausting. It takes a lot of efforting, energetically, cognitively, emotionally. And something really significant when somebody moves to the UK, or indeed if somebody from the UK moved somewhere else and they had an experience of that, is that there's a natural seeking out of something familiar because it helps us to regulate, helps us to stabilize, helps us to feel that sense of belonging. And it doesn't mean that there's a rejection of the culture that that person has come into. It doesn't mean that they're not intending to integrate. It means that they're needing and seeking to regulate. So when we seek out the familiar, it becomes a lifeline to us in preventing our own burnout, in preventing our own dysregulation, in counterbalancing the stress, the inevitable stress of that transition and all that that brings. So seeking out things like familiar others who, even if it's simply about speaking the same language, first mother tongue, or about familiar foods or something else that helps that person to feel safe, essentially, it's a human basic need. So again, just noticing where there's been judgments around people for certain behaviours, perhaps from a place of not knowing. It usually always comes from a place of not knowing, but I'm hoping maybe some of this might deepen some of the knowing for some of you. I can't help but think back to times when I have also spent time living and working in particular areas in Europe where British people, the very same British people that often will say, oh, those that have come from other countries aren't taking the time to integrate here. But when they go abroad, seek out their home comforts to the extent that if you go somewhere like Ibiza or other areas where a lot of British people have gone to somewhere for holiday as a holiday destination, they've wanted their sense of safety, they've wanted their sense of familiarity to such an extent that there are British pubs, there are shops selling only British food. We all have this intrinsic need to feel like there's something familiar around us that helps us to settle ourselves, to feel well in ourselves. And so when it comes to welcoming people in and providing spaces where people feel included and valued, we need to consider how we can support those that we work with in not feeling like they need to choose, and feeling as if they truly are accepted, and not just accepted, but that we're really grateful for them being there, because without them, the whole system would really be non-existent, let alone, on its knees or crumbling, which is this tipping point that we're at the moment where so much really does need to change. So thinking first of all, when have you needed the familiar in order for you to survive the unfamiliar? So where does this resonate for you? You don't necessarily need to have left, your country of origin to have experienced this. When have you been in a place or a space where you felt unsure, where you felt like you didn't belong, and you sought out something familiar to help you survive that experience of the unfamiliar? Just notice what comes to mind. And if you wish to capture it in any way, feel free. And if you have been far from home, maybe there were reference points that helped you in that instance. Just noticing what that might have been. Was it someone speaking the same language as you? Was it music that was familiar to you? Was it food or something else? What helped you to cope if you have had the experience of being far from home? And what did you long for the most whenever you perhaps felt out of place? And who or what has made you feel safe or seen whenever you've been in a new environment? And again, that doesn't necessarily need to be because of working somewhere else. It could be that you simply changed job in your own country of origin or somewhere that you felt at home, and simply starting somewhere new with different people in a different place or for a different profession or work culture. What made you feel safe or seen whenever you found yourself in a new environment? And then finally, in any time when you felt like an outsider, I mean, it might have even been going back to the school playground, maybe something from that chapter of your life. What restored your sense of belonging? So, a little earlier on, I mentioned about how often the thing we need is the thing that we find most difficult to ask for or to open up to. And that with burnout, quite often, for some people, it can mean that we actually feel like withdrawing. So we'll retreat more often than not. And the difficulty with that is that we then isolate ourselves even more. And the connection that would bring us otherwise strength is inaccessible to us because we've kind of pulled ourselves back and away. And so often when we want to make a difference in relation to this, we need to, for those of us wanting to make the situation better, really proactively reach out to people so that they find it easier to accept that connection. Because often for the person that's feeling disconnected, that's feeling a need to withdraw, they will struggle to kind of step forward and ask for it. And what we need is the combination of restoration and change. As I said earlier, they need to happen together. And when we bring in more care, we foster more resilience. So we start to feel more supported when we're looking out for each other. And when we are looking out for each other, we feel more seen and safe together. So we can actually be more resilient. We can withstand more together. But we individually, those of us that have been in this space for the entire series perhaps and have been reflecting on our own burnout journeys, will recognize the need to fill up our own cup so that we can help others. So it's often the thing that people struggle the most with is about looking after themselves when they naturally do actually care for other people, and they need to hear about how important it is to care for themselves so that they can then open and extend care to other people. And it's something that when we come together to do, we really then can make the change that needs to happen. And I came across a really powerful metaphor the other day about bison. Now, when a storm is approaching in the plains where buffalo will graze, the other cattle of different breeds and horses, for example, will run away from the storm, and they will become exhausted trying to outrun the storm. Whereas bison come together, they stand next to each other, and they actually walk towards the storm. And in walking towards the storm, because they've come together, they reduce their exposure to the storm and they actually walk through it. They find their way to the blue skies on the other side. And I thought when I heard this, what an incredible metaphor for what we need to bring systemically to the very situation we've been exploring as part of this webinar series together, and what's happening for pathologists, and how can we make it out the other side. We need to do it together. It needs to be something that everybody journeys with alongside, rather than, on our own. That feeling of burnout, is quite tempting just to eject, to flee, to run. If we were instead to ground ourselves, to center ourselves, to nurture, to nourish, to take a stand against the things that actually will otherwise destroy us, and come alongside others around us and face those things and speak up and be the change that we want to see, then we can move through. We can also protect each other. We can look out for each other. We can bring more care to each other. So the final aspect for today's session is around what it might look like for you. And you can think about this for yourself individually in relation to your own experience of burnout. If what's brought you here today is that sense that you're so tired, but you're still wired, that you're not really sure how you're still going, and that you're worried that you're about to hit that cliff, or you've met burnout before and you're feeling like you're back in that cycle again. So it might be about, what does it mean for you on the other side of burnout if you were courageous enough to really do what your body instinctively knows it needs you to do for you and to ask for around you. It might be about the collective experience of burnout in your teams, in your profession, contemplating what might it look like if the things that I've presented as stats were flipped and it was the opposite. What if the majority were feeling healthy and well and work-life balance was there and you were flourishing? What would that be like? How different would that be for you? If everybody was supporting each other, standing up for what's needed, what might be possible on the other side? So again, capturing that in whatever way you wish to, and then contemplating what one small step might be that you could take towards that. If you were out the other side of it, fast forwarding however many years feels instinctively right for you, and you were speaking to this future version of you that had come through the storm, they'd made it through, everything had changed because of the ripple effect of the choices that were made together. What would that future you say is the one small step that you could take today that would help you move towards it? Hopefully, this session has helped to highlight something that we've been building on week, really, and that is that burnout isn't just a personal issue. It's one that's cultural, it's societal, it's systemic in the places that we live and work, and that's across the globe. It's not just in the UK. in the UK and in your profession in particular, I'm hoping that you come away hearing that your voice has value and that speaking up really does help to surface what otherwise could be sitting underneath the surface, could be staying hidden. And that the small actions that you do choose to take, even things like naming what's unsustainable for you, what you can no longer continue to deliver on, those actions create ripple effects. People, if you set a certain standard and a bar, people continue to expect the same thing from you unless you say, actually, no, this is too much. I can't do this. It's not okay. And there's a collective need for that before things will really start to change. But that's often the most difficult thing for us to do. When we bring care to ourselves so that we then can care for others and advocate for others, we create what I call communities of care. And these are really dependent on connection. So they're dependent on creating the space to have those conversations, even the simple, greetings and things, the time to just ask about somebody's family, not even the deeper conversations that lead to those deeper connections, but something rather than nothing, and having the courage to really invite other people into conversations and into decisions that are being made. Belonging is really built through us all taking shared responsibility, recognizing the difference that actually looking after ourselves and being regulated makes to the presence that we have when we're with others, and how restorative that is, remembering that co-regulation piece. And standing together means speaking up, it means showing up, and it means creating space for those that feel unseen or unheard. We won't know they feel necessarily unseen or unheard unless we ask. So creating that opportunity for feedback, asking the questions, remembering that there needs to be trust and rapport for people to be able to feel safe enough to share. So it might not happen the first time, it might not happen the second time, but keeping opening up those spaces, keeping opening up those avenues, role modeling what you want to see, saying what you mean, meaning what you say, being in integrity with what you do, rather than sweeping things under the carpet.